morning. We gather together this morning because others came before us. Some have left examples for us to follow, others lessons to learn from. And the paradox is that many have left both pain and joy. We honor our ancestors this morning not because they are perfect, but because without them, we would not be here together, sharing our joy, our pain, our dying, and our living. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. My name is Andrea Brown. My pronouns are they, them, and I am so excited to be your worship associate here today. This is a welcoming congregation, and we are always working on how to welcome and care for one another better. If this is your first time here, we are so glad that you have come. And whoever you are, we welcome you in the fullness of who you are. As we begin today, we want to acknowledge that this church occupies land in Huichin, the unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We understand that we continue to benefit from the seizure and occupation of this land. We acknowledge and embrace our responsibility to take restorative action. We affirm that this is deeply felt and commit our congregation to be in right relationship with Indigenous communities, aligning in solidarity, supporting Indigenous projects, and caring properly for the land. So please, take a moment to prepare yourself and your space for our time together. You might want to get a candle and a way to light it, just so you can join in the chalice lighting at home. Now let's kindle our flames with these words by Odette Fulbright Fulson. This light we kindle is set in the lamp of our history. We inherit this free faith from the brave and gentle, fierce and outspoken hearts and minds that have come before us. Let us be worthy inheritors of this faith, and through our good works, pass it boldly to a new generation. We also pause to remind ourselves of some of the foundations of resilience. We light a candle of courage, a candle of acts of service, a candle of fellowship, and a candle of hope. May we find and cultivate these in ourselves and one another. Now, please join in singing our opening song, For the Earth. The words will be on screen. Please join me in saying our covenant. Love guides this church. The quest for truth and justice is its common purpose. To give thanks, listen deeply, speak with care, honor our differences, and seek and grant forgiveness. These things we covenant with one another.
co-chair of family ministry, and I'm here to tell you a story for our Time for All Ages. Normally, we'd ask all the young at heart to come join me up on the steps, but unfortunately, we'll have to use our imagination here. The story I'm going to read to you is called The 1619 Project Born on the Water. It's by Nicole Hannah-Jones and Renee Watson, and it has gorgeous pictures by Nicholas Smith. I really recommend that you check it out because, one, I can't show you the pictures, and they're really gorgeous. And number two, because I can only read a few parts of this story because of time limitations. And I feel really bad about this because these words are by Black women and they are beautiful and perfect. And I am a white woman cutting out some of these words. But I hope that by introducing this book to you, that you will go out and read the whole thing yourself. And adults will read its parent book, The 1619 Project, which is very good. So, this book, Born on the Water, 1619 Project, starts with a young Black girl assigned to draw the flag of her ancestors. It's a common assignment, but as the descendant of slaves, she doesn't know where they came from, and she's ashamed. She tells her grandma, and her grandma tells her a story. She tells her that her people's story starts before the very first slave ship, the White Lion, sailed in 1619, 400 years ago. They had a language. They spoke Kimundu, had their own words for love, for friend, for family. The kingdom of Ndongo was nestled between the Lukala and the Kwanza rivers on a high plateau in West Central Africa. The people were good with their hands, knew the power of a seed, how to plant it, water it, how to make something out of nothing. The people were good with their minds, good at math and science. They used shells for money, counting, recording, trading. They knew what their work was worth. They spoke Kimbundu, had their own words for joy, for grow, for home. Their hands had a knowing, and they danced. Stolen. And the white people took them anyway, kidnapped them, baptized them in the name of their God, stamped them with new names. Ours is no immigration story. They did not get to pack bags stuffed with cherished things, with the doll grandmama had woven from tall grass, with the baby blanket handed down from generation to generation, all the way back, so far back that it carried the scent of the ancestors. They could not hug their fathers and mothers, daughters and sons, hearts thumping in rhythm, clinging to that final sweetness before the parting. No promises whispered from mouth to ear of seeing each other soon. Just wails and sobs, confusion and wrists worn raw from shackles made of iron, feet split and bloody from the 200-mile march along the Kwanza River. They had no things, but they had their minds. The old ways, the harvest songs, the just right mix of herbs etched in their memories. They had their bodies, histories and bloodlines and drums pulsing in their veins. With trembling fingers, they braided seeds into their hair, defiantly hiding tiny pieces of home to plant one day in new soils. No matter what some say, the people fought, and the white people took them anyway, forced them into the bottom of an evil ship to sail to a new world they had no desire to see. They were on the ship for a long time, and about half would die. But those who survived would call each other family and vow to live. That is why they say they were born on the water. Finally, they landed in Virginia and were sold and made to work on tobacco fields and get nothing for their work. But though they were sad, they were resolute. And so the people planted the seeds they'd carried over the ocean, snuck to visit one another in the dark of night, sang songs, swapped tales of yesterday, remembering. And the people learned new words for love, for friend, for family, for joy, for grow, for home. We are in a strange land, they said, but we are here, and we will make this home. We have determination, imagination, faith. We will survive because we have each other. Resist. Life was hard, and it would get harder for the generations to come. White people told the people they were not human, that the people were things to be bought and sold and given as gifts, alongside horses and chairs. When the people were beaten, they said the people did not feel pain. When they sold the people's children, they said the people didn't love. These were lies they made up so they could feel okay about slavery. It is wrong, always and forever, to own human beings. It is wrong, always and forever, to treat human beings like things. The people fought back. For 250 years, the people resisted every day, in ways big and small. For 250 days, the biggest resistance of all was that the people kept living. Legacy. And the people who were born on the water survived, kept living and living. It was illegal to teach enslaved people how to read, but they birthed generations of teachers and librarians, scholars and authors. They were brokenhearted, beaten, and bruised, but they became healers and so much more. The little girl returns to school, proud and unashamed, to draw an American flag because Black people have made America what it is. Thank you.
This is a quick change. This is Blues for the Duke. Also a change for the closing piece. The postlude is not going to be Afro-Cuban dance. Instead, it's going to be a piece in honor of Jelly Roll Morton.
Now let us enter the time in our service that we make to hold our hearts and our cares and concerns for one another and ourselves. We lift up and hold the joys, the sorrows, and the challenges that we may each be facing as we move through each day. During our time of silence, during this service, or any time during the service, I invite you to share any joys or sorrows or significant milestones of your own in the comments section. As we see these and as we share them with one another, I invite us to hold these cares in the compassionate embrace of this loving community. Please join with me now in the spirit of meditation. In the struggles we choose for ourselves, in the ways we move forward in our lives and bring our world forward with us, it is right to remember the names of those who gave us the strength for in this choice of living. It is right to remember the power of hard lives well lived. We share a history with those lives. We belong to the same motion. They too were strengthened by what had gone before. They too were drawn by the vision of what might come to be. Those who lived before us, who struggled for justice and suffered injustice before us, have not melted into the dust, have not disappeared. They are with us still. The lives they lived hold us steady. Their words remind us and call us back to ourselves. Their courage and their love evoke our own. We, the living, carry them with us. We are their voices, their hands, and their hearts. We take them with us and with them choose the deeper path of living.
Years ago, in my early 20s, the family grapevine was buzzing, which came buzzing to life. aunts and uncles on my mother's side passed the news that my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, was not who they thought she was. Someone tracing the stories of their ancestors shared that my great-grandmother, born Ava Grumbo, buried in a Catholic cemetery, was indigenous. The news shocked my family, but so many things clicked into place. So that explains why Dad's family hated Mom and those comments about her not being good enough, said one aunt. It explained why, while most of my maternal family, myself included, is very pale, occasionally someone, like my brother, was born with browner skin. My brain stayed stuck on how this history was unknown, or perhaps concealed, from Ava's grandchildren and great-grandchildren. In my great-grandmother's obituary was a line, blurry and almost impossible to read, that mentioned that she attended school before marrying at 20 years of age. The type, or maybe the name of the school, is very fuzzy and hard to decipher. But to include that line in that tiny obituary suggests something, a reason, perhaps, about why my family lost this history, lost their cousins, and lost my great-great-grandfather's language. In the 1870s in North Dakota, the Catholic Church had missionaries that were opening up day and boarding schools for one for Indigenous boys and another for Indigenous girls, where my great-grandmother lived. These schools were part of a history of residential schools, which ripped children from their families, shamed them for holding on to their cultures, and beat them when they spoke a language other than English. Kill the Indian to save the man, they said. Genocide, the killing of a people by stealing their children. Let me pause here and say I am not Indigenous. I am a white settler. I grew up in a white family embedded within the culture of whiteness with many of the material benefits that are attached to white settlers. None of that changed when news of my great-grandmother rippled through my family. Some people I've told this story to went, oh, maybe you can use this history to get an edge in applications or grants, or use it to claim some sort of victim status. It's always white people that say those sorts of things. What did change was the context I saw my family's stories in. I only have a few memories of my grandmother, but the stories that I heard from my family were not happy stories. She lived with the Catholic constraints against conception, sobbing when she found out she was pregnant with her 10th child. She cleaned the house in storms of anger and depression. She beat her children. From my grandmother's pain, I see my mother's pain. My mother left a childhood of a disconnected Catholicism, overwhelmed and disconnected parents, to chase an impossible but purifying dream of acceptance and love from another religion, one of those fundamentalist types of Christianity. Those choices helped her reclaim the terror of her childhood by recreating it. From my mother's pain, I see my pain. I see generations of intergenerational trauma played out in my childhood. A few weeks ago, Reverend Michelle preached powerfully about forgiveness, or an alternative formation, saying something like, I acknowledge this thing that hurt me, and I am working to not let it hurt me anymore. Part of that work is structural. The new residential school is ripping children out of their indigenous nations and adopting them into white families. Part of that is personal, directing my rage towards settler colonization, contemplating reaching out to my third or fourth removed cousins from the Turtle Mountain Band of the Chippewa. All of that work is genopoiesis, people creating. And that's the work we do here. We create, we build a people with hard and complicated and sometimes ugly histories, a people bursting with stories of who we are, not content with disconnected fragments, to hiding our relationships to one another. A people who heal with each other, not looking for ways to turn our history into monetary gain. A people that can see our pain, stay with it, and wrestle with these and our histories. May it be so, and amen.
Thank you, Andrea, for your thoughts and for your jumping in at the last minute, as we have been doing plenty of juggling of folks serving on site, staff and volunteers, because of COVID exposure and trying to keep everyone safe. All right, let's talk hymns. You know, the carefully curated ones in our beloved hymnals, the ones that, of course, we know we can automatically trust no matter what, you know? Those. About midway through the gray hymnal, the classic Singing the Living Tradition UU hymnal, I knew I'd get it there. About midway through the gray hymnal is a pair of pages. On one side is the African American spiritual, We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder. On the other side is a different set of lyrics for the same tune, and the music in a different key. Now, first of all, it does make a lot of sense to have two versions of the music, because the first one has 5 flats in it, and the second key is all naturals, which for anyone who has ever seen or played a piano knows it's a lot easier to play in all naturals, rather than adding in that many of the black keys, the sharps and flats. Although it might amuse you to know that as Brian was picking what music he would play today and choosing which version, he picked the one with all the flats because he said, and I quote him, "It's more fun that way." Now, it is also deeply embedded in the folk music tradition to create new lyrics to popular songs, and many beautiful songs have been created that way. But let's look a little more closely at this pair of songs. The first one, We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder, is a well-known African-American spiritual about freedom and perseverance through rugged and difficult times. It has been an important song to many African Americans throughout many, many years. The other one, written in 1975 by lyricist Carol Etzler, is titled "We Are Dancing Sarah's Circle," also inspired by a biblical story. Now, this version has a few, issues. The last line of every verse in "We're Dancing Sarah's Circle" is "sisters, brothers, all," which is problematic in the sense of its being a binary view of gender identities. Now, that's not something that was an awareness at the time Etzler wrote the lyrics, or at the time that the UU Commission chose it for this hymnal. But still, with our current awareness and commitment to inclusion and respecting identities, it is something we need to consider and take into account. The other issue, though, let me tell you a story to tell you this one. Folk musician Peter Mayer decided to share this version of the song at a concert, one with a largely African American audience. The lines are fairly easy to pick up, and the tune is familiar after all. And he got going, and not a single person joined in, not a one. Later, when he talked with someone about why, he got the reason. Now note that the song "We Are Dancing Sarah's Circle" was inspired by the biblical story about Abraham and Sarah. The reply to why no one joined in: why would we sing the tune of a beloved song about freedom to the name of an abusive slave owner? All right, another example here. There are a great many songs in the modern Jewish song repository by a prolific composer and lyricist, Shlomo Carlebach. There's a beautiful song written by him in our UU Teal hymnal, the song "Return Again," sung at many times of the year, but especially during the time of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But many Jews will not use a single shred of his music, no matter how beautiful it is. His history, Carlebach's history of misconduct and abuse, are well known. And for some, that history affects their experience of his music too deeply. There's even a Facebook group named "Anything But Carlebach" that gathers and shares alternatives to his music. History and the stories behind things can be super fun to delve into. In fact, ancestry research is one of the most popular hobbies in the United States, right alongside gardening. It can be exciting and inspiring to learn the stories behind things, to find the gossip, to find the juicy tidbits. And in fact, a UU history professor of mine said that's what she liked about history. It was the gossip. But what about when it is not fun to learn that history? What about when we find things that are not at all things we want to hear? Things that change our perception of that overall history and can be embarrassing or even shameful to talk about. We can't have one of these without the other. And perhaps the latter of these, finding the uncomfortable parts of history, is the more important one anyways. I remember when I spent a good bit of time delving into some ancestry research myself. I had been given the family tree maker software from my mother, who was getting into it also, and it came with a subscription to Ancestry.com. So I was off to the races. Aside from a few dead ends on my closer family tree due to common names and no known birth dates, I had enough details to trace a number of different branches a good ways. It, helps that one of these branches is exceptionally well documented by the Daughters of the American Revolution, due to an ancestor of mine having served as an officer in the war. And that's the branch that gets even more interesting a few generations back from there. When I first got into the research, I had a couple of questions in mind. Were there any ministers in my background? Was there anyone who had done something significant or was a troublemaker of some sort? Come on, we want to find the troublemakers, right? I found these out, and the two folks that answered these questions even have wiki pages to them. One of them, the troublemaker, was potentially minister of the First Baptist Church in the United States. He was a General Baptist, meaning they believed salvation was for everyone, although if you ask me, that sounds pretty universalist, and was a troublemaker who was reported to be whipped for his beliefs and stood up to authorities in many different towns. Now, that's the kind of cool history I was hoping for. Now, the other ancestor was also potentially minister of the First Baptist Church in the United States. It's actually a debate which of those two churches was the first one, but since I got both of them, I'm going to claim it. He had a bit of a different role in society. So he was a Brown and was one of the founders of Providence, Rhode Island. The name Brown is all over the city of Providence because they were a wealthy and powerful family, which of course at the time meant they owned lots of slaves, lots of property, and in fact a nephew in the family, just one step off my direct line, was captain of a slave trading ship. But wait, there's more. My ancestor, the Reverend Chad Brown, was the person in Providence, the leader in Providence, who took the lead on treaty negotiations. In other words, he was the person who was responsible for taking the land from the local indigenous population. Ouch. The first one, the troublemaker and theological universalist, I like that history. But Reverend Brown, that's history that is hard to hold and hard to even acknowledge. And after discovering all of this, I brought it up to some family members of mine to raise it for discussion. I wanted to share what I had found. And their response was startlingly dismissive. Well, everyone's got some stuff like that back in their history. That doesn't mean we need to talk about it. Let's just enjoy the stuff we like instead. You ever gotten a response like that? Dismissiveness, redirection, minimizing, or even gaslighting? You're being too sensitive. No need to worry about that. That's a long time ago. Let's just work on what's happening right now. Now, I could say some obvious things, like the fact that our history informs the present, and the fact that the less desirable or palatable parts of our history or minority perspectives are usually the ones made invisible. Or that keeping those parts of history invisible continues to keep folks with those identities or heritages invisible and perpetuates oppressions in the present. Or things like that patterns persist over time, over lots and lots of time, and that the patterns that the stories and histories point to are still here, and as long as we don't acknowledge them, will continue to shape reality. And there's also the ongoing topic of restoration and reparations, making up for harm done in the past. Now, that's a complicated topic and one I hope we'll be getting into more deeply in the future. But anyway, around it, it is a journey of knowing, a journey of acknowledging the history, one's part in it, one's ongoing benefits derived from it, then relationship building and deeply learning about and advocating for and doing things for current issues. There are histories all around us that are hard to hold. And our personal histories, our family histories and ancestries, and the history of our communities, our country, our congregation, and our institutions. Now, when you look at institutional histories, it's usually only the positive stuff that we tend to hold up, right? In our UU history, we talk about Theodore Parker, who was a vocal abolitionist and harbored escaped slaves in his home. We don't talk about the Unitarians from another congregation right in Boston where Parker lived. This was William Ellery Channing's church, who is another famous Unitarian. We don't talk about those congregation members who were on the teams of folks hunting down the escaped slaves. We avoid talking about the fact that there were no statements against slavery from either the Unitarians or the Universalists. None from the Universalists, largely because they simply weren't organized enough to come up with something unified. And none from the Unitarians, because they were largely from the wealthy class, and it would be economically problematic for them to speak out against the slavery they were financially benefiting from. That's the history we don't talk about much. More recently, at the time the Unitarians and the Universalists were coming together in the early 1960s, we had our own civil rights controversy, which many call the Black empowerment controversy, but some have rightly named the white power controversy. But folks don't like to call it that, of course. Promises for Black-led projects, for the funding for Black-led projects were promised and then rescinded. There was a mass walkout from one of our General Assemblies. There were different groups competing for the funding, one led exclusively by people of color, the Black Action Caucus, and the other both blacks and whites. Black and White Action was the name of that one. There were lawsuits, and this new denomination, this new association, was almost bankrupted. There was a bailout from the Veatch Fund, with wealth and money insulating us from the full consequences of our actions and choices as a denomination. And then here's another story that I only very recently learned about. You may have heard of the fabulous Unitarian Universalist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, All Souls Church, which is among the largest of the physical UU congregations in the country, and with a deep, deep history of social justice and racial justice work. However, going back to, I believe, the 1940s, right after the congregation was founded and the Tulsa race riots, and you look at the newspaper article that in fact spurred the riots, the newspaper article about the incident between the young African-American man and the young white woman that was inflammatory and ultimately spurred on and created the violence. Now there's mystery and controversy about where that article came from, but is thought to be written by Richard Lloyd Jones, who was a newspaper writer at the time, and happened to be charter member and president of the newly formed All Souls Unitarian congregation. He was reelected president also. If you're saying, ouch, that's fine. This is not stuff you find in your standard introduction to UU history talks. And I'm saying it pointedly because it's not stuff we need to try to gloss over and coat with whatever you coat stuff with to make it taste less bitter. We have bitterness and mistakes in our history. It was around this time that there was a dance called for at a General Assembly that was taking place in Virginia. And the organizing group thought it would be nice and nostalgic to call for it to be a colonial period theme. We need to acknowledge the history and the past so that we don't cause the pain and insensitivity that were caused then when people of color looked back and asked whether or not they should wear chains to the dance. And if you're saying, oh, we would notice that now, it was not too long ago that a very similar incident happened amongst well-meaning liberals. Now, I'm not saying all of this just to sling mud around and delight in airing dirty laundry. Every one of these brings tears to my eyes because there is so much harm and suffering in our histories. There is so much in there. Next week, we'll be getting more into the what then part of this, inspired by Dr. King's family, who is calling for folks to not get stuck celebrating Dr. King this Martin Luther King Day, but instead to go about doing the things that his vision called for in the here and now. It is important to look towards the past with open eyes, to really see what is there, and to hold it with grace and with acknowledgement. Is it easy for me to talk about and publicly air some of my family ancestry? No, it's not. And it's even more complicated as I acknowledge my ancestor who was instrumental in taking the land away from the indigenous in the Providence, Rhode Island area, along with the fact that I have indigenous heritage myself. And you know, of course, it's complicated. And I want to caution us against getting too strident or dogmatic, and instead to keep grace at the forefront. Pushing things with my family member wouldn't have gotten anywhere. But you know, in the intervening years, I've gotten them to talk about it a little more. That's progress. Not huge leaps and steps that I would hope for, but you know, it's progress. And there's also the reality that some things are just not as clear-cut as we may initially think. So back to talking about hymns. Back to the song I started talking about today. We are dancing Sarah's Circle. As I often say, it's complicated. You'll hear me say that. And you'll hear that in this reflection from UU minister Kimberly Debut. She wrote this piece about her journey back to her family home when she was in a sensitive time, both for herself and for her caregiving for a family member. And I hope you'll hear where I'm going with this. In order to ensure I built community outside my family, she says, I actively sought out a Unitarian Universalist church. Long my tradition, but not much my practice in recent years. I was embraced by the minister and the members of the UU congregation of Saratoga Springs, which quickly became my home. In those first few months, feeling very unsure of myself and my footing, figuring out how to be in my family system again without losing myself, figuring out what to do with my life, I encountered a religious community who held and loved me, even as they were in their own pain and sorrow. As a beloved member, Sarah, surrendered her fight against stage 4 breast cancer. I watched a community have enough love and care for all of us, and it helped me focus outside of myself and truly begin to heal. In the last months of 2004, Sarah worked as she was able on what was to be the centerpiece of a large quilt that now hangs at the back of the chancel at UU Saratoga. It features a dove, which can also be seen as a chalice, with the only piece of metallic fabric, a beacon of peace and love. Sarah died on Christmas Eve. When the quilt, titled Journey Well, was completed a few months later, we saw the center and instantly called it Sarah's Circle. And we sang this song in her memory. I barely knew Sarah. I met her only once. But I carry that memory, and every time I'm at UU Saratoga, I pause for a moment when I approach the quilt to remember her. We are not a faith of clear-cut answers. Rather the opposite. We're a faith of lots of questions and wonderings, but also a faith about being real about things that may hurt or be uncomfortable. Sometimes our histories are hard to hold, and sometimes our realities are hard to hold too. This shouldn't stop us from the prophetic work and taking them up, looking at them, seeing how they inspire us, how they spur us on, and also being open to the grace and the wonder abundant throughout our world. becoming conduits for both justice and for compassion in the work that we do. And yeah, a lot of times it's complicated, but let's take it that way. May it be so.
As we commit together to make this a loving community, we take time to acknowledge how important your gifts and support have been and how much they have made a difference. We invite you now to make an offering. Each week, half of our offering is shared with a good neighbor organization who need our financial support, especially now during these difficult times. This month, our good neighbor is the Read Aloud Volunteer Program, which is a nonprofit that matches trained volunteers, many of them our own UUCB members, with students at Richmond and San Pablo elementary schools to read one-on-one weekly throughout the school year. We are grateful for any amount of offering you can share. Today, our offering is A Clarice by Reynaldo On, sung by Katie Lipka with Brian Baker accompanying. A translation of the words will be on screen before Katie begins. Thank you. Please join me in dedicating the offering. We dedicate our offering and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service.
It has been so good being together today, here online, and hearing and seeing comments from everyone. But before we shift to our coffee hour, I want you to remind you to check out all of the things that are happening during this virtual time at UUCB. Check them out on our website or in the weekly email the week ahead. And of course, I have a few things to lift up to you. Today, 2 p.m., I hope that you will log on for a reading of the play, The Mountaintop, written by Katori Hall. It's going to be a great reading, a great performance, and there will be a talk back with the actors afterwards. And I hope you can come 2 p.m. today. Look on the discuss list or the church website for the link about how. We will be remaining virtual for worship at least through January and into February at the least, trying to help everyone in our community stay safe and stay healthy. And in fact, many UU congregations, as well as other congregations who had been in multi-platform, in person and online, have many, if not most of them, have shifted back to all online as we all strive to keep everyone healthy and safe. And last, please do check out on the website and in the week ahead for information if you are interested in joining our Widening the Circle committee. The committee is now taking applications for folks who want to join in, and we'll be looking at those applications this month and are really hoping to find some enthusiastic folks as we strive to move forward with our work of widening the circle and inclusion and really paying attention to the diversities and many things here at UUCB. And now, let's join in singing our closing song, Gather the Spirit. The words will be on screen.
Of this hour, or try
Quoting from Dr. Howard Thurman, "Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in fair weather or in foul, in good times or in tempests, I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve." As we examine and re-examine our past and our histories, may we hold on to the insights and the resolve that we find, letting them inspire us and propel us forward into whatever we may face ahead. And now, from this time of worship, may you go with hope, with connection, with peace, and with courage. And remember, you're never all alone. Blessed be.